Okay, let's kick off. So the start is just me doing some of the introductory stuff. So as people join us, I'm sure they won't mind missing some of the boring introductory and kind of information. So just a very, very brief introduction. Ian, if you want to go to the next slide, please. We are, iKVA is hosting this. I'm John, I'm the CEO of iKVA. Very pleased to be hosting this session. Just a couple of sentences on iKVA. We're an AI knowledge management company based in Cambridge. We're formed out of both Cambridge University Computer Lab and also from the Alan Turing Institute. So we've got a great pedigree in AI technology. And we developed what we think is some really interesting technology using some different techniques to most, what I'm going to call traditional AI knowledge management systems. And we developed this with a number of companies over the past couple of years. Foremost of those would be the BBC, Arm and the Home Office, where we really use their input to try to help craft what our solutions are. Next slide, Ian. Just to talk a little bit about the housekeeping and what this webinar is going to be. I think everybody's picked up by now, hopefully, that we're looking at a webinar of around 30 minutes-ish and followed up by Q&A. So if you've got any questions, you can save those to the end. We're going to mute everybody for the duration of this webinar. But again, feel free to use the chat window if you've got any questions or such like, and we can unmute you if it's a really interesting question and actually, have some good conversation going on there as well. Then finally, before I hand over to Ian, just next slide, please, Ian. The next slide thing has become a phrase, hasn't it? Let me just briefly introduce our two speakers for today. So first of all, we have Professor Richard Mortier, or Mort for short, who's both the CTO at iKVA, but also has a very prestigious academic background as being the fellow and president of Christ College, Cambridge, and also a professor of computer and human interaction. And with Mort, we also have Ian Firth. Ian is the Chief Product Officer at iKVA, but has a long history in, if you don't mind me saying long, Ian, has a long history in product management in technology companies, being the former Chief Product Officer at Speechmatics and also at Citrix. And now, really, without any further ado, let me hand over to Ian and Mort to talk about exactly why the taxonomy is dead.
Okay, thanks, John. So what's this webinar really all about? It's a bit of a provocative title. Do we really mean taxonomy is dead? Well, we're going to show you that there are new ways for you to think about locating information from repositories of data. And these new ways will enable more value to be gained and enable much more to be achieved than just locating information. Often, when you're wanting to provide any sort of information through search or discovery, there can be significant overheads involved. If you want to provide anything more than the most basic mechanism and move to what is often referred to as a smart search, you can add significant data management tasks that can be quite involved and require change in business processes to adopt. These can involve overheads in management and taxonomies of data training and cleaning. And what's more, each time someone refers to that smart search, they talk about something a bit different. So it's really hard to understand what all these needs are. It gets even more complex when you bring multiple data sets together, each having different requirements, which just multiplies those challenges, involving more people and more time. These overheads should not be overlooked, really. Operating with this sort of human-in-the-loop model requires knowledge managers and employee training and be much more time-consuming than you might think. You may well not deliver the return on investment that you hope for, and maybe, just maybe, you're actually going to try and achieve something that's not possible, and certainly not what the promise of your data may hold and should provide. So we're going to talk around these issues and what alternatives there are to either enhance or replace these mechanisms. This could enable new opportunities to utilize data without many of these overheads, achieving better integration into workflows, and support more direct use of the data with less reliance on people being able to craft good search terms. At the same time, it can result in more proactive use, bringing data to users rather than users having to go and pull data through search mechanisms. This brings in new modes of work that are not possible with the more traditional search mechanisms. And you can remove that sort of discrete operation of search and move towards a discovery model that can empower the people undertaking the work and make it less of that sort of separate action. This can really help support business efficiency, quality, and speed of work, and provide more time for employees to use the skills they have rather than spending time on those less skilled side tasks that they just have to get done. This problem seems largely unsolved for the consumer model. Google and others index a large single source, the internet, albeit a very large single source, and they present the results very effectively from keywords and phrase-based search criteria and using NLP techniques. So why is it so hard for enterprises? Well, some of the information is probably on the internet, for sure. But for an enterprise, the value of the information is the data they own. It's not public. It's often siloed across multiple repositories and tool sets and uses many different data structures and formats. To make many search technologies provide the results users need, they need taxonomies. And these can become very complex very quickly. Even once you have a good taxonomy, you've got to label all your data with this information and then constantly manage it as you get new data and new terms are added. Users don't really want to be involved in managing this, right? They just want to create content and consume it. But expertise is needed to get that right labels on the data. So if the users who are the experts inevitably they don't do it, who does do that? The data management exercise needs constant effort and training of staff. It's absolutely not a one-shot exercise. And no matter how hard you try, it's practically impossible to do it. The taxonomy is more than a few terms. And the result for that is that quite often the real aim you have is out of reach. There's also a vast amount of data where there is no easy way to label it. Chat sessions, sections of videos, for example. This data is being generated real time and fast, so it's not practical to maintain it. And it often contains decisions and outcomes of meetings, among other things, and this is just lost in the noise. This data can also be spread across multiple tool sets, so different management techniques are needed for each of those different tools, and it becomes impossible to manage or restrict the tools that people can use. Some of these so-called smart searches often rely on techniques like users marking results as good. This means that they will be deemed the best results for future. So when you do a search, what you do is you find things that other people have found. Over time, those are no longer the best results as more data is added and often things get missed. When you're looking for data, you're often wanting to find things that other people don't find. So this really isn't as practical as it seems. This sort of model of, other people looking for red shoes liked these results works well for sort of consumer sales, but it doesn't really work for enterprise data sets at all. On top of that, most companies are not starting from scratch. There are sets of legacy documents that have been there for many, many years, and the effort to go back and process them is just too high. So this information is often ignored and contains actually what I think are really important information that was authored by people possibly no longer at the company, and it just gets lost. And I think it's really important because without this knowledge, you're going to end up repeating the same work, wasting time and effort. As I said, there is a vast and rapidly growing set of data that is available to businesses, either in external repositories or within the company. And this data set is generated from many different parts of the business. It's very dynamic and often stored across many data repositories. Each of these repositories might have a different set of metadata associated with it, or it might not have any metadata or labeling at all. So how do you find the data you need to carry out the task you're wanting to do? Searches might be good within some of those data repositories. They may well have very well managed labels, while others are just completely raw information. And if you want to locate that information, how do you make sure the information is treated equally from all of these sources and the best information is not missed because it's located somewhere that's unlabeled? That unlabeled data could exist in chat sessions or videos or audio files, or just be an unmaintained store of documents. The other aspect is that people only search for things that they think might exist. So asking people to search causes issues. Either they don't search at all, or they search in the wrong places. So I think what's really needed here is threefold. Firstly, the ability to bring all the data together and treat it equally. Secondly, bring the information to the users so they don't have to search, it's discovered for them. And finally, integrating all of that stuff into the tools they're using so they're not having to remember to go and look for something and where the best place to look for that is. If you require people to search, they would just either not bother, as it's a bit of a hassle, or just forget that search is available on that particular set of data, or look in the wrong place, or only look in some of the places. None of these are actually optimal solutions. So what if there's a better way to look at solving these issues and empowering those employees to make the best use of all of that valuable data that you as a company have got stored? I'm going to pass it over to Mort, who's going to have a chat to you about some of the technologies in this space and how you might be able to use those to help.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Coming back to the original question, is the taxonomy dead? I think it's perhaps just resting and in need of reinvigoration or some broader set of alternatives to be made available. So the challenge that we have then is that we'd like to be able to index data as it is without requiring lots of manual interventions, so lots of valuable employee time being spent managing the indexes, managing the ingestion of data. We'd like to be able to combine structured metadata, which is still useful, with the unstructured text itself. So what I'll get to in a moment about the technology we use, we tend to focus very much on the unstructured text. We're just looking at the text itself. But it becomes much more valuable when you can combine that with the metadata as well, which tends to come in more structured forms. We'd like to make rich media as discoverable as other sources of text. So this is not just about documents in your document management system, not just about the documents sitting in SharePoint. This might also be, you might also think of this as being about the chat sessions that you have now on Teams, for example. You might think about this as the recordings of meetings like we're having now on Zoom, where you can take speech to text technology and turn speech and recorded audio into text very easily. How can we make that sort of content as discoverable as more traditionally sort of managed documents? And then we'd like to be able to potentially combine public data with private data. So many companies obviously have access to lots of internal stores of documents and text and knowledge of many kinds. It is commonly the case that becomes much more valuable when used in combination with other public data sources as well. So being able to treat these two types of data, these two sources of data on an equal footing, rather than having to move between different tools, move between different processes for dealing with them, while obviously still retaining full control and privacy and confidentiality of the data that is confidential to a company. Next slide, please, Ian, to quote a meme. So our contention is that traditional methods really aren't enough for doing this in the modern age. There's lots of different ways that we currently use to handle unstructured text data. The one that perhaps everybody is most familiar with is keyword search. So this is for those who are not, just in case, this is your traditional Google search. The process you go through there as a user of this kind of technology is you've got an idea in mind that you're trying to find something, something about that, and you have to pick a few words to represent what that might be. And this can be very precise. You can find exactly the information you're looking for. I mean, I'm sure all of us have used DuckDuckGo, Google, Bing, all these different search engines over many years to find useful information. However, it is sometimes rather an iterative process, at least in my experience. So trying to find exactly what the right words might be to represent the thing that you're trying to find can take a bit of time and often a bit of expertise. So if you're presented with a need to search for something as part of your role, your job, but it's in an area which you're not completely au fait with, you might not be able to find quite the right keyword terms, quite the right search terms to find the sorts of things you're looking for. And it can take a little time to key into that. So it can be quite time consuming to do this well. The second sort of common approach, I guess, that I'd call out is collaborative filtering. So this can certainly help. The sort of canonical example of this is people who like this also like that. It can work well in some contexts. It can work patchily in others. I happen to have an incident this morning when I was searching on Amazon trying to find whether they stocked a particular keyboard I wanted to buy, a computer keyboard. And I gave the search terms for that keyboard. In fact, I gave the name of that keyboard. And they came up with a number of things that were relevant. So there were a couple of keyboards at the top of the list, although not the one I was looking for, unfortunately. Then there were several computer mice. And then still within the top 10 hits, there was a stainless steel paring knife. And it really wasn't at all clear to me what that had to do with anything. So sometimes the links that can be made, if you just track people's behavior, can be unexpected. And that process does also require a degree of tracking of user behavior, which can be problematic, particularly in a world of GDPR and sort of increased sensitivity around privacy and what exactly is the data and the information that's being gathered on us all as we use the net. Finally, I guess there's a whole plethora of techniques in this space, but I'd call out knowledge graphs as another one where you're creating more explicit structure between the documents in a data set. There are a whole bag of different ways that you can go about doing this. Lots of natural language processing, NLP techniques that you can use to relate documents to one another. And that will create relationships from the content of those documents, but it can be quite resource intensive and it's often not flexible enough to provide a kind of general purpose facility for search. So So it certainly has value, and there's certainly value in these different techniques. I guess I'd put taxonomies under this sort of approach as well, but it's often not enough. Next slide, please, Ian. So the question is, how can we make this better? And the answer is using our technology, obviously. Next slide, please, Ian. So the way we view this is we're looking for information discovery as information retrieval. So this is harking back to traditional techniques from the mid-late 60s and 70s, really. So we're not going to make the user decide what the important keywords are. As I've said, keyword search can be very useful, but it's not the only way to go about this. And in some ways, we think it's not the most useful way to go about this. We're not going to rely on users structuring their data. It can be useful to do that. And it's important not to ignore the natural structure implicit in the data, but it's not necessary to make users go and spend a lot of time and have entire teams managing and maintaining taxonomies. When I say natural structure there, I'm thinking about the source the data comes from, for example. So if you imagine taking a company knowledge base or user customer reports of experience using a particular product, there's implicit structure in the fact that it's that data that you're looking at as opposed to some other data that you might be looking at. But you don't need to necessarily have a very detailed taxonomy to help you manage that and help you categorize all that. The other, I think, key observation we make is that actually you get a lot more utility out of some of this technology if you don't make users stop and search at all. If you have to stop what you're doing and go and search for some information, that's breaking the flow state that you might be in. It's focusing on the action that you're having to carry out rather than the outcome, which is simply having the right information presented to you. And that's ideally what you'd like the system to provide. So instead, what we're trying to do with our platform and with our approach is to use features of the user workflow to determine what's relevant. Very often, particularly when you're interacting with a computer or some other, some platform, some system like this, you're already looking at some text, you're looking at some information, you've got something there available to you at that point in time, which is going to be the thing you're currently working on. It might be the document you're producing, it might be something you're reading, it might be other things you've got open, it might be something you've recently looked at. You can use that to determine what's relevant. We can use that, sorry, to help you determine what's relevant. And we can also then try and embed this capability into the workflow that you have already. So rather than making you stop and go and use a different tool to access this information, we try and expose the retrieved content within the workflow in the tools that you're already using. Many tools now, particularly web-hosted tools. So I'm thinking here, broadly from things from web browsers all the way through to Office 365 and so forth. They provide quite rich APIs that allow you to extend those tools with new capabilities. And so we can embed this facility into those workflows. So you don't have to use a different tool. You don't have to move on and move out of what you were doing and then come back to it later. Next slide, please, Ian. Excuse me. So the core technology that we have, that we apply to this problem is essentially a combination of three things. We provide document embedding. So this is the glib phrase for this that's used in the literature occasionally is to know a word by the company it keeps. So you get information about the document by looking at the words, the distribution of words used within that document, perhaps their ordering, the sequencing of those words, the frequency with which those words occur, particularly in comparison then to the frequency with which they occur in a larger collection or in everyday life. The essence of this is there's a number of different ways out there that we can represent documents as vectors. So we can take a document of different lengths, short documents, long documents, and we can process those to represent them as vectors, so as sequences of numbers in a vector space that describe a point in space. So thinking back, I don't know the background of everybody on the call, but thinking back to perhaps GCSE maths, you can think of a coordinate space, two-dimensional space, three-dimensional space, analogous to that, but with many more dimensions. So you're representing a document as a point in space, as a vector in space. And the point of these document embedding techniques is that nearby documents are semantically related. So things that are considered nearby, depending on the way that you measure nearby, things that are nearby are considered related. We then have technology to build indexes of those collections of documents. So we can take a collection of documents, convert it to a collection of vectors, and then index those vectors. And that technique that we use, MRPT, multiple random projection trees, allows us to execute what's called nearest neighbors search very efficiently. So we can basically take a document that you might give us as a query, and we can find documents that are closely related to that within any of the sets that we've indexed very efficiently. And this gives us a couple of things. This allows us to search many different collections in parallel, so public collections, private collections, and we can find related content. It also allows us to do it very fast, which means we can take this capability and embed it into existing workflows and make it feel kind of natural to use this so that the right information is being presented to you as you need it. rather than the more kind of traditional stop what you're doing, go to a different web page, go to a different tool, execute a search, look at the results, and sort of break out of what you're doing. We can make this a very embedded experience. Next slide, please, Ian. Excuse me. Now there's more, but wait, there's more. So we can provide that core technology now. That's the basis for our existing platform. The way we're building that platform is to make it easy for us to add new capabilities to that. So we can take some of the latest technologies coming out of eminent research groups around the world in the NLP space, and we can take those and apply them and develop them into our platform. So we can add those kind of capabilities, whether that's things that some people may have heard of, GPT, BERT, sentence transformers, topic modeling. There's lots of different techniques out there. NLP is a very big space. There's a lot of research that's taken place over the last, whatever it is now, 50 years, 60 years in it. By putting those into our platform will handle the deployment of those capabilities and scaling those capabilities so that we can expose them via our APIs and make it easy to embed those capabilities into your tools and workflows. So the idea here is to bring these technologies much closer to the user, to enable people to make use of these, to really see the effects, see the beneficial effects of some of these technologies in what people are doing every day. Next slide, please. So, and with that brief excursion through the technology, I'll hand back to Ian.
Cool, thanks, Mort. So, as Mort just described, there are sort of many places that this enhanced method of discovery can bring new possibilities. You're opening up your data to ways that can take this technology can take you beyond search. So I was just wanted to talk you through some of the possibilities that we often talk to people about as examples. I'm sure there are many other opportunities here that you might be able to think of. We'd love to hear about those as well. The first really and most basic enhancement that we've mentioned many times today is to enable proactive methods to push data to users from wherever it's held. So if you imagine a CRM that takes the content of a customer record and automatically provides details of solutions to issues from customer knowledge bases, or provides information about similar issues and presents solutions from previous conversations, or maybe integrating into a software engineering tool for bringing support for bug solving by showing related issues from the past without relying on engineers to mark them up as related issues, because that is never quite as good as you hope, along with things like from conversations like Slack or Teams or external data sources, places like Stack Overflow. This is an area that is increased during the pandemic, as people are working from home a lot more, and finding information when you're remote can be a really additional challenge, where more data is stored in chat conversations because there's a lot more of that going on, and people aren't so aware of other data changing around them, so they're just not aware of that changing. So bringing that data to users can be very powerful. So bringing all that together and presenting not just information, but the most relevant information, and without the needing the users to go to multiple places to locate that information. It's even possible to bring insights while creating documents, maybe authoring a contract and seeing details of other similar contracts in real time and available in place in the workflow where it's needed. These technologies that Mort talked about really lend themselves well to these modes. The more context there is, the better the results, and there's no need for those users to craft search terms or use multiple tools to get that best job done. The next step up from this is to use your data to make recommendations and support decision-making frameworks. A great example of that is the iKVA Bid Builder product that we have, which takes sets of data that define frameworks of business goals along with inbound work definition, and uses them in conjunction with information about previous responses to that inbound data. Each time a new opportunity is received, the technology assesses this opportunity against all the data and can recommend actions based on past outcomes of similar opportunities and provide alignment with company direction through relevance to various frameworks, for example. So those frameworks could be internal goals like for your company, or external frameworks that define things like market sectors or things like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, so you can align your business to these goals. This model of integrating your data into decision frameworks enables data-driven choices to be made fast and enables the focus to be on the delivery and not on the background investigations into the success criterion or having to distract other key stakeholders from their other activities. An even bigger step is to use these techniques to examine and evaluate entire ecosystems and describe the component parts to enable strategies to be evaluated, operated, and managed and support the understanding of impact of making changes. Maybe even predict direction based on seeing patterns early. This enables frameworks and entities to be grouped in ways that keywords just cannot support. You can't group data by terms that haven't yet been defined, yet you can see groups form by examining their relationships to each other and see that change over time. Often this data can cross silos and boundaries, and these things just get missed if you don't pull it all together. By using this technology, it's possible to break through all those disjoints and see the bigger picture much more clearly, and use those patterns to inform choices and examine progress against the specifically targeted areas. So the iKVA Envisioned product supports this visibility with graphical mapping to allow trends and direction to be assessed constantly as the world around them changes, supporting up-to-date information that can be monitored and evaluated constantly to support those business choices. So I hope you can see that using this kind of technology supports search, yes, but in a new way that supports a journey that you can take way beyond that. I believe this really makes it a transformative technology that you can use to move forward and achieve so much more than just search ever will enable you to do. And you don't need huge projects to gather and process more data. You can achieve this with the data you already have by just extracting the power from it. So really, there are three things that I think I want you to remember from today, even though there's 4 bullet points. Don't spend time making search better. Search is part of a journey, not a destination, right? You need to look for other ways to locate and access data, making it discoverable and making use of the information you have. There are hopefully solutions and techniques that we've described here today that would help you show that that data discovery is more than search, and that there are some great ways to achieve this that are within reach. And they're not challenges that need vast amount of resource, time, and money thrown at them. Rather, they're just new ways of thinking that might provide value quickly, simply, and deliver a really good return on investment incredibly quickly. Second thing is, having data is one thing. Really using its power to drive business workflows and tasks gives it huge value. Don't just look inside the silos you have today. Find ways to use the data that cross those boundaries to enable use of all of that valuable data you have, no matter what the source it comes from is. Why give your employees new and great ways to communicate, like Slack and Teams, and then take away that value by not making the content accessible? You really risk giving the efficiency with one hand and taking it away with another. So you really should think about those data sources. And lastly, take a look at the processes and outcomes you want to achieve. Don't silo search into something that really just drives a tactical front end for users, but think about how moving forward in new ways can unlock the real strategic value of that data and provide value to the whole business and its outcomes. Search was not a way to transform business outcomes, but discovery is so powerful. To unlock this, you can do so much more and achieve much more potential. You must use all that data that you have. There is a new level of information and empowerment to be gained if you do. So that's all I have to say. So over to John to look at the questions, I guess.
Cool. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Mort. That was really interesting. So everyone, if you've got any questions, now is the time to ask. We're using the chat session to ask questions. And if you want to request to get unmuted so you can ask it on a more personal level, then again, feel free to do that and just request that in the chat session. I have, however, got a few questions that have already come through that are kind of being posted on private channel. So I'm probably just start off with those as a way to get us started. So the first question is, there wasn't much mention of NLP in this chat. How does NLP measure up to some of the problems that we've talked about? That you've talked about. So Mort, that's probably one for you, actually.
Yeah, so I think NLP covers such a wide range of techniques for dealing with, as it says, natural language processing. I think that the techniques that we described, that I talked about, are NLP techniques. They're, I guess, more in the statistical space of NLP, statistical semantics. I think that what I sort of say as a general answer to that is that what we're hoping to do with our platform, what we're sort of doing at the moment with our platform, is trying to broaden the set of techniques we can expose. So we can draw on all of the different techniques and different systems that are out there to provide these different capabilities through to users to enable what people need, basically, to try and make them as relevant as possible.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, Mort. Another question I've got here is, Many organizations are committed to using taxonomies with a huge investment in systems, people, and processes. How could you possibly persuade people that the taxonomy is dead when they're already using this approach? Ian, that sounds like a good question for you.
Great, thanks for that one. I really think probably the best way is to kind of give it a go. If you find one use case that you can really test it out, that needs data from multiple sources, where all those sources aren't labeled, you can really begin to see what you can achieve. And that doesn't have to be a really huge involved process to use these techniques either. So it's something you can actually embrace quite easily. I think then you can look at wider data ecosystem and see what that best return on investment is for your taxonomies, and see if any of these technologies and techniques could really help reduce some of the overheads in improving that. It is really possible to use our technology to help validate or invalidate existing taxonomies by using these techniques to establish data groupings and see the relationships between data, and actually see whether your taxonomies are actually aligning the same things, and use it to support the improvement of taxonomies, and maybe even the simplification of them, which can often get you better results. And I think it's just worth pointing out that these vector techniques and things that Mort's talked about really aren't labor intensive. So you really can just extend existing systems and processes without a huge upfront investment. And I think if you just stick with those taxonomies alone, I think you're going down a path of more and more effort for probably the same reward. If you really want to actually move through that and bring something new, I think trying out some of these techniques would be is a really valuable thing to do to help you achieve more rather than just more of the same.
Okay, thanks, Ian. There's a couple of questions here that have come privately. So one is very, very simple one. How much does your solution cost? And there's another one from Liz, which is, can you elaborate more precisely on the financial business case for customers, such as quantifying the percentage cost savings and ROI? So perhaps I will take these ones actually and save Ian a bit of talking. So the answer to how much does our solution cost is it depends, of course. And the big it depends how much data that we have to look at ingesting. It depends how much of that is public data versus private data. But to give a less woolly answer than that, so for small organizations, the cost is typically, we're a SaaS solution, so it's a SaaS license fee. Small organizations, typically 25K a year. For larger organizations, it could be 100K. For very, very large organizations, it could be even more than that. In terms of trying to quantify the ROI, we actually got some data from our good friends at Mott MacDonald. So welcome our Mott MacDonald friends, so I can see a couple of them on this call. And they actually did some really good analysis looking at the time saving that they can use, have using a solution like ours versus some of the other solutions out on the market. And so they did basically did some study and said that they're looking at, for their data intensive users, they're looking at a solution that is more based on these techniques rather than standard NLP, would save them around 20 to 30% of their time spent searching. And that equated to a financial saving of about $2 million per year. So there is actually a very, very clear business case that Mott was able to kind of talk to us about. And that kind of information, Liz, is something that I'm very, very happy to give you extra information on that if you want to go through that. I have another question here from Andy Lukes. And this is probably one for Mort, actually, which is, how do you reassure security people that database access meets any security constraints or policies?
Yeah, and there's one just above that as well, also from Andy, about more generally, I think, getting access to that data, getting it out of those databases. So I think that
I was going to do this one first, Mort.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, so to handle the second one first, then. I think what we'd say there is that most of the, I'm going to take them together because they kind of relate to each other. Most systems now will provide some forms of APIs to allow you to get access to that sort of data, and to do so on an ongoing basis, but with pretty stringent and well-designed security protocols in place over that. So access to data is not unfettered. It can be audited, it can be logged. And it can be controlled and it can be revoked if we decide that that's a problem. The second point I'd make more specific about reassuring security people there is that It's worth noting that with a lot of the techniques that we have in our platform currently, and certainly this is something that can be discussed on a case-by-case basis, but a lot of those techniques don't actually require us to retain copies of the original data that we use to generate these indexes. Once that document embedding process has taken place and the document's been converted to a vector, you can't recover the original document from the information that's held about that. So providing we can point back somehow to where the original document was, we can build integrations that enable you to search that data set without us having to hold copies of that data in its original form. So that reduces the attack surface of this kind of system. I think ultimately as well, there's possibilities here where obviously our preferred solution is to put this all on our platform because it's easier for us to manage, but we can look to do private cloud deployments as well. So that might be something which for cases where there really are very stringent security requirements on top of this, that's something that we can also explore.
It's probably worth just making it really clear, because we don't need to keep copies of the documents and we just index them and turn them into this bunch of numbers that we can use to locate them. All we need to hold against that is some way of relocating that information. So when we find a result, you can use that URL or link back to the original data, and that original data remains protected by whatever security mechanisms the company has for anyone who would access that directly. So the data still remains controlled and managed by the company who own the data, not by us.
Yep.
Okay. So Andy, hopefully that answers your question there on both points. Do we have any more questions? Right, thanks, Andy. Do you have any more questions from anyone? Let's just give people a minute or so, just in case there's some more questions. One question, and this is not one that people have asked, but one I always get asked is, and I'm going to address this to Mort, which is when it comes to kind of enterprise search, Google have already done this. Why are you bothering? Which is kind of the standard kind of elevator conversation that I get. Mort, do you just want to answer that one?
Sure. So I think that why are we bothering? We're bothering because we see that there's still a need. There's still a need for people to be able to get access to data effectively. Why are we bothering in the sense of why are we taking the approach we're taking? I think that Google's technique is obviously extremely effective for keyword search at very large scales. That's not something, it's not a problem space that we address or that we could address with the approach that we're taking, I think. But in many cases, enterprises are not the web, right? They're not looking at data at that kind of scale. They're not looking at data which is as structured as the web in terms of having links and relationships and being able to try and work out who wants to see what in the same way that Google can do with the web. So I think the techniques we're taking are more applicable to the particular domain, and I think the problem still exists, even though Google have tried to address it and other companies have tried to address it in the past. So I think that's the answer to why we're bothering.
Cool, thanks. And just very quickly from Andy, is this useful for structured as well as unstructured data? Well, the quick answer for me is yes. But Mort or Ian, actually, probably, do you want to add a little bit more flesh to those bones?
I think it probably falls in Mort's area, because what I was going to say is, yes, but you might need some slightly different embeddings depending exactly what sort of data that is.
Yeah, I think I'd say that we are very much focused on text at the moment. So if it's text, we can do something with it. The platform that we currently have and the tools that we've currently built tend to take text as the primary citizen in that, if you like, and then the structured data that goes along with those documents, we make use of that if it's there, and we can certainly provide that as provide things that make use of that structured data. But for us, the primary focus really has been on the unstructured data, on just the raw text. Having said that, it's not impossible to think if there were a particular use case that came up, we could certainly explore how to do those two things more in parallel, make them kind of more equal citizens in that space. The idea of being able to do, for example, being able to use structured data to do filtering of documents, and then using some of the techniques that we've already got to be able to then search among those pre-filtered set of documents, is something that has come up on several occasions, and we're starting to explore ways that we can enable that.
I think the other thing I was just thinking it might add to that as well is, if you've got more than one data source, even if both those are structured, actually they'll be structured in different ways. Actually bringing those results together and being able to compare across those different data sets is very, very difficult. the technology, the vector technology, in terms of understanding how related these documents and these sets of data are, mean you can actually pull together all the different data sources and actually find the best results regardless of where they come from, which I think is another key value that helps with this.
Cool. Okay, I've got another question here from Liz, which is, can you elaborate on your route to market? How do you access and educate customers, e.g. direct or through third-party resellers? Liz, I'll just give you a really brief answer here. If you want more detail, I'm very happy to talk to you. You've got my email, I think, now. So if you want to go into a little bit more detail, drop me a line and we can communicate. But to give you a brief answer, at the moment, our main business model is as kind of like a young company. We're predominantly B2B, but we see our future very much in kind of like reseller and OEM. So that's something we're working towards, and we think that will be our main route to market in the future, especially through the OEM type partnership deals. But at the moment, we're kind of, most of our customers are direct B2B type customers. Okay. But I say, happy to elaborate on that if and we can take this offline, so to speak. Any more questions, guys? No. Well, in that case, I thank everybody for their participation. Hopefully you found this really, really useful. We're planning on running a series of these webinars. We have great access to resources and experts at both Cambridge University and at the Alan Turing Institute. We'll be sending out just a short note giving everybody links to this recording so you can share it as you needed to. But also, if you've got any suggestions about what you'd really like to hear about using some of the experts we've got access to, we'll be really interested in doing that. And we plan to have our next webinar probably in about 3 months' time. And if you've got a key topic that you'd really like to hear discussed by experts in the field, we can arrange to make that happen. So when we send out the follow-up email giving you the links to this, please give us any hints or tips you'd like to hear experts talk about in the field of AI, knowledge management, or data science. Okay, so on that note, thanks everyone. Thanks for attending, and look forward to speaking to you soon.
Bye-bye.